gears. It is week 4, 5, something of quarantine. And if you're like me, that means all of your gear is in storage. So this week, we're going to be discussing proper ways to store your gear.
When you ain't got no money, you got.
So I'm going to be going over several different storage techniques for different pieces of gear today. So there's going to be a lot of information. If you have any questions, go ahead and let me know in the comments below. I have a lot of free time right now because we're in quarantine. So hopefully immediate responses on all of your comments. Woo! So the first thing we're going to talk about is your sleeping bags. Now, all of your sleeping bags when you get home from a trip should be taken out of their stuff sacks, put in their giant mesh bags that most sleeping bags come with nowadays, and left somewhere that's temperature controlled and where they're not being compressed. And you might be thinking, well, why do I need to do that? Well, your sleeping bag rating is entirely dependent on the loft of the down or synthetic insulation. That's why when you lay on like a sleeping pad, your back still gets kind of a little cold because your body is compressing the insulation. So what we want to do when we're storing those things is not store them in a manner that's going to constantly be compressing that insulation. When we're long-term storing our gear like we are right now, we need to make sure that we're taking good care of it and that it's going to be ready for us on our next adventure, whenever that may be. So we're going to want to make sure that that loft is staying nice and fluffy. The next piece of gear we're going to talk about is sleeping pads. Now, sleeping pads similar to sleeping bags, we're going to want to leave laid out. For all of those self-inflating sleeping pads that you fancy people have, you're going to want to leave the valve open and it half inflated. And a good place to store these is under the bed in your guest room, under the bed in your room, in your closet that doesn't hold coats because your coats are on your body. Another thing you want to make sure before you store your sleeping pads is that they are completely dry inside and out. Now, a lot of sleeping pads that you have to blow up with your mouth get really gross and they'll start to grow mold inside of them because the vapor from your breath is full of gross stuff and then it starts to fester, gets real disgusting. We don't want that. So to avoid it, we're going to dry our sleeping pads both inside and outside. Outside's pretty easy. Let it sit. It'll dry. To dry the inside of your sleeping bag, you want to inflate and deflate it many times with something that isn't your mouth. One of the suggestions that I read was to use a hair dryer on a low setting. Make sure it's not on a heat setting. And it'll fill it with air. You can then decompress it. Or if you're fancy and you have a sleeping pad inflator, use that. But you want to make sure that you're getting no breath inside and you're completely drying out the inside before you store it. Now, I got a lot of cavers on here, so we're going to talk about how you should be storing your headlamps. When you store headlamps for any amount of time, I do this every single time I get home from a cave trip. Batteries out. Take your batteries out of your headlamps. There are a lot of reasons to do this. One, battery acid is corrosive, and if you leave your batteries in your headlamp, it can be corroding the inside of your headlamp that you spent a lot of money on. Headlamps, not cheap, especially the ones we use. Second, if you take the batteries out, you're lessening the likelihood that your light's going to accidentally get turned on and drain that battery, especially if you don't use a rechargeable battery and now your batteries are just dead. You didn't even get to use them and the inside of your headlamp's corroded. Take your batteries out, people. We're going to keep going on with this cave gear stuff. And if you don't know how to properly store a rope, maybe you can check out this video that I made on different methods to store your rope. But what if you have shorter pieces of rope, or webbing, all of that stuff? Well, first and foremost, you're going to want to make sure you properly decon and dry all of that gear. Once it's properly deconned and dried, I store mine daisy chained in a big bag. There's nothing super fancy you need to do, but make sure it stays temperature controlled and out of the sun. UV rays can do horrible things to your gear. Similarly, all of your cave gear needs to be properly deconned. You might not know what decon is, and you can check out this video about how to decon your caving gear and what that is and why we do it. So once all your gear is deconned, store your cave gear together. It is so much easier to pack for a trip if your cave gear is all in one place. We have a giant dresser that just holds cave clothes because that's the kind of people we are. And the last thing I want to talk about is storing your tents. Now, we all know we should dry out our tents completely thoroughly before we pack them up, and sometimes we just have to bring them home and then dry them out here. But once your tents are dried out, it's highly, highly recommended that you do not fold it and roll it on those same lines. Now, I grew up in Scouts, and every single time we put our tent away, we folded it the exact same way, and then you put the poles in and then you roll it up. What this actually does is it creates lines, and those are going to become weak spots and end up tearing. So how do you store your tent? Just stuff it in the bag. First of all, it's way easier. Second of all, everything fits so much better. And third, because you're just shoving it in there, it's way less likely that you're going to be repeating those same crease marks like you do when you fold and roll a tent. So those are some storage tips to get your gear through quarantine. I hope you guys are all hanging in there. I know I'm doing my best to hang in here. If you guys have any questions, let me know in the comments below. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all at Piff Explorers. Don't forget to check out our website, piffexplorers.com, and we will see you next week. Bye, guys.